Kazakhstan is located in the heart of Eurasia, covering an area of 2,712,000 square kilometers, making it the ninth largest country in the world. This vast country stretches from the Caspian Sea in the west to the foothills of the Altai Mountains in the east, from the Siberian taiga in the north to the Central Asian deserts in the south. Today, Kazakhstan is a modern state with a population of approximately 20 million people, rich in oil, gas, uranium ore, and other minerals. The country's capital, Astana, impresses with its futuristic architecture, while the economic hub of Almaty remains the nation's cultural heart. But did you know that it was in the territory of modern-day Kazakhstan that humans first domesticated the horse? Or that such great conquerors as Genghis Khan and Tamerlane originated here? This land was a crossroads of civilizations, a meeting place between East and West, the cradle of nomadic empires that changed the course of world history. The Great Silk Road passed through here, and the Baikonur Cosmodrome, from where humanity began its exploration of space, was located here. This is the history of Kazakhstan. The history of the Kazakh lands dates back to ancient times. Archaeological finds indicate that people inhabited these territories as early as the Stone Age. During the Bronze Age, approximately 4,000 years ago, the Andronovo culture emerged here, leaving behind numerous burial mounds and petroglyphs. According to many studies, it was representatives of this culture who were the first in the world to domesticate the wild horse, a move that radically changed the way of life of the steppe peoples and gave rise to nomadic herding. In the first millennium BC, the first large nomadic communities emerged in Kazakhstan. The Scythians and Sakas formed powerful tribal alliances here, renowned for their military prowess and the richness of their gold jewelry. Saka kings were buried in grand burial mounds filled with treasures that continue to amaze archaeologists to this day. The famous Golden Man from the Issyk burial mound became a symbol of ancient Kazakh culture. However, the true flourishing of these lands began with the emergence of the Turkic Khaganates in the 6th century AD. The Turkic Khaganate became the first Eurasian empire, stretching from China to Byzantium. It was the Turks who gave rise to the language family to which the modern Kazakh language belongs. Their descendants established numerous state entities, the Western Turkic Khaganate, the Turgesh Khaganate, and the Karakhanid state. In the 10th century, Islam began to spread across these lands, brought by Arab and Persian missionaries. The cities of Otrar, Turkestan, and Taraz became important centers of Islamic culture and scholarship. Great scholars and poets worked here, including Abu Nasr al-Farabi, known as the second teacher after Aristotle. Meanwhile, the steppe expanses remained home to nomadic tribes who perfected horsemanship and military skills. It was from these steppes, in the 12th century, that a man emerged who was destined to change the world. Temujin, better known as Genghis Khan, was born on the Mongolian steppes, but his empire united vast territories from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea under his rule. The Mongol conquest of the 13th century radically changed the political map of the region. Kazakh lands became part of the Yoshi Ulus, which later became the Golden Horde. The Mongols not only brought destruction, but also facilitated cultural exchange between East and West. The main routes of the Silk Road, connecting Europe with Asia, passed through Kazakhstan. In the 14th century, another great conqueror appeared on the historical stage, Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane. His empire stretched from Turkey to India, and his capital, Samarkand, became one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Timur's campaigns also touched the Kazakh lands, where fierce battles took place between various nomadic factions. After the collapse of Timur's empire and the weakening of the Golden Horde in the 15th century, new political entities began to form in the territory of modern-day Kazakhstan. It was during this time that the name Kazakhs emerged, meaning free people or wanderers. The first mentions of the Kazakhs as an independent people date back to the 15th century. In 1458, the Sultans Keri and Zanibek, dissatisfied with the policies of the Uzbek Khan Abulkhair, moved their clans to Mogulistan, where they established an independent Kazakh Khanate. This event marked the founding of Kazakh statehood. The first ruler of the new state was Keri Khan, who reigned until 1473. However, the true heyday of the Kazakh Khanate came during the reign of Qasim Khan in the first half of the 16th century. Under his rule, the state's territory expanded significantly, and its population reached 1 million. Qasim Khan created a code of laws, Qasim Khanin Kaskajoli, the bright path of Khan Qasim, which regulated various aspects of life in the nomadic society. During this period, the traditional division of the Kazakhs into 3 juzes, was finally established. The Greater Juz in the south and southeast, the Middle Juz in the center and north, and the Little Juz in the west. Each Juz had its own distinctive economic, cultural, and political structures, but all were considered parts of a single Kazakh people. The 17th century brought new challenges for the Kazakh state. From the east, the Dzungars, Oirat tribes who had established a powerful military state in western Mongolia, threatened them. The Dzungar Khanate possessed modern weaponry for the time, including firearms and artillery, giving it a significant advantage over the traditional nomadic cavalry of the Kazakhs. The early 18th century became one of the most tragic periods in the history of the Kazakh people. In 1723, the Dzungar Kuntaishi Galdan launched a large-scale offensive against Kazakh lands. These events became known in popular memory as Aktaban Shubirindi, the years of great calamity. The Dzungar troops devastated vast territories, destroyed cities, and stole livestock. Tens of thousands of Kazakhs were killed or captured. Many clans were forced to abandon their native nomadic camps and seek refuge in neighboring countries. Some Kazakhs fled to the Russian Empire, others to the Central Asian Khanates. However, the Kazakh people did not break under the blows of the conquerors. During the period of greatest danger, outstanding military leaders and political figures emerged. Abulkhair Khan of the Little Juz, Semeke Sultan, and Ablai Khan of the Middle Juz, and Bolat Khan of the Great Juz joined forces to fight against a common enemy. The turning point was the Battle of Bulanti in 1728, where the combined forces of the Kazakh Juzes, led by Abulkhair and other Khans, inflicted a serious defeat on the Dzungars. And in 1736, at Anirakai, Kazakh troops achieved a decisive victory, putting an end to the Dzungar aggression. However, the struggle against the Dzungars demonstrated to Kazakh rulers that it was becoming increasingly difficult to confront external threats alone. The Lesser Juz, which suffered the most from the invasions, was the first to appeal to the Russian Empire for help. In 1731, Abulkhair Khan swore allegiance to the Russian Empress Anna Ioannovna. This decision marked the beginning of a long process of integrating Kazakh lands into the Russian Empire. Initially, Russian influence was nominal. The Kazakhs retained their traditional governance, nomadic lifestyle, and religious and cultural traditions. Russia was primarily interested in securing its southern borders and developing trade. Gradually, other Juzes joined Russia. The Middle Juz formally joined the empire in 1741, although actual subjugation occurred much later. The Great Juz retained its independence the longest, finally joining Russia only in the mid-19th century. The reign of Ablai Khan in the second half of the 18th century marked the last period of relative independence for the Kazakh state. Ablai skillfully navigated between Russia and China, maintaining diplomatic relations with both empires. He managed to unite a significant portion of the Kazakh lands under his rule and strengthen the Khanate's international prestige. After Ablai's death in 1781, the traditional Kazakh political system began to gradually decline. Russian authorities increasingly intervened in the internal affairs of the steppe, curtailing the power of the Khans and sultans, and introducing new forms of governance. The 19th century was a time of radical changes in Kazakh society. In 1822, the Russian government abolished the Khan's authority in the Little Juz, replacing it with the Orenburg Border Commission. Similar reforms were carried out in other zhuzes. Kazakhstan's territory was divided into districts governed by Russian officials. These changes met with significant resistance among the Kazakh population. The first major uprising was led by Isatai Taimanov and Makambet Utamisov in 1837 to 1838. The rebels demanded the restoration of traditional governance and an end to colonial policies. Although the uprising was suppressed, it demonstrated the strength of Kazakh national identity. Even more widespread was the uprising led by Kenessary Kasimov, which lasted from 1841 to 1847. Kenessary, a descendant of Khan Abalai, attempted to restore an independent Kazakh state. During his period of greatest success, he controlled vast territories in central and northern Kazakhstan. The rebels created their own army, established weapons production, and established diplomatic ties with neighboring states. However, the forces were unequal. The Russian army possessed modern weapons, well-trained officers, and reliable communications. Gradually, the rebellious territories were recaptured, and Kenessary himself died in battle with the Kyrgyz in 1847. The suppression of the uprisings accelerated the integration of Kazakhstan into the Russian administrative system. A major administrative reform was carried out between 1867 and 1868. Kazakhstan's territory was incorporated into the Turkestan Governorate General, the Orenburg Governorate, and the West Siberian Governorate General. At the same time, active colonization of Kazakh lands by Russian and Ukrainian settlers began. This process became especially intense after the abolition of serfdom in 1861. The government encouraged peasants to resettle in the fertile lands of northern Kazakhstan, providing them with various benefits and privileges. The resettlement policy led to significant changes in the socio-economic structure of Kazakh society. The best pastures and lands were given to the settlers, forcing the nomadic Kazakhs to adopt a sedentary lifestyle. Many became farm laborers for Russian peasants or migrated to the cities in search of work. By the end of the 19th century, approximately 4 million people lived in Kazakhstan, approximately 80% of whom were Kazakhs. However, Russians predominated in the cities and industrial centers. Construction began on the Trans-Siberian Railway, linking the Kazakh lands with central Russia. The region's economy gradually integrated into the national Russian market. Kazakhstan became a supplier of raw materials, livestock, wool, hides, and grain. The mining industry developed, primarily copper and gold mining. Rich coal deposits were discovered in the Karaganda Basin. Cultural changes also affected the educational system. Russian schools opened, but the Kazakh population often viewed them with suspicion. Madrasas, Muslim schools, played a major role in educating the Kazakhs. Gradually, a Kazakh intelligentsia emerged, educated at Russian universities. Abay Kunanbayev played a prominent role in the development of Kazakh culture and literature. A great poet and thinker who lived in the second half of the 19th century, Abay became the founder of modern Kazakh written literature. His work combined the best traditions of Eastern poetry with the influence of classical Russian literature. Abay translated the works of Pushkin, Lermontov, and Krylov into Kazakh, introducing his compatriots to Russian culture. The beginning of the 20th century brought new upheavals. The revolution of 1905 also affected Kazakhstan. Workers' strikes broke out in the cities, and peasant unrest engulfed the resettlement settlements. The Kazakh population largely remained aloof from the revolutionary events, although some members of the intelligentsia sympathized with liberal ideas. Stolypin's agrarian reform, begun in 1906, had more serious consequences. The government planned to resettle millions of peasants from Russia's central provinces to Kazakhstan. To achieve this, millions of dessiatines of the best lands were confiscated from the Kazakhs. The reform met with fierce resistance from the indigenous population. The uprising culminated in 1916, sparked by a decree mobilizing Kazakhs for rearguard work during World War I. Traditionally, Kazakhs were exempt from military service, so the mobilization was perceived as a violation of historical privileges. The uprising engulfed almost the entire territory of modern-day Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. The rebels attacked settler settlements, Russian fortifications, and government institutions. Tsarist troops brutally suppressed the uprising, burning Kazakh villages and exterminating civilians. Tens of thousands of Kazakhs fled to China to escape the repression. The First World War and the subsequent revolutions radically changed the political situation in Russia. The February Revolution of 1917 led to the fall of the Tsarist regime. The Kazakh intelligentsia actively participated in political life. In July 1917, the First All-Kazakh Congress was held in Orenburg, where the Alash Party was founded and the program of the national movement was adopted. Prominent public figures such as Alikan Bukhaykhanov, Akhmet Baitursinov, and Mirzakip Dulatov became the party's leaders. They advocated for broad autonomy for Kazakh lands within a democratic Russia, the development of national culture and education, and land reform in favor of the indigenous population. After the October Revolution, the Bolsheviks attempted to establish their rule in Kazakhstan. However, this was met with resistance from the Alash Party. In December 1917, the Second All-Kazakh Congress proclaimed the creation of the autonomous state of Alash Orda, with its capital in Semipalatinsk. Alikan Bukhaykhanov headed the Alash Orda government. The new state controlled a significant portion of Kazakh lands and attempted to pursue an independent policy. However, the outbreak of the civil war prevented Alash Orda from gaining a foothold. Kazakh lands became an arena for struggle between the Bolsheviks and the White Guards. Under these circumstances, the Alash Orda leaders were forced to navigate between various forces. Initially, they supported Admiral Kolchak's provisional Siberian government, hoping to secure guarantees of autonomy. However, the White Guards failed to fulfill their promises and continued their colonial policies toward the Kazakhs. Disillusioned with the Whites, many Alash Orda leaders defected to the Bolsheviks in 1919. The Red Army promised the Kazakhs equal rights and self-determination. In August 1920, the Kazakh Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic was formed within the RSFSR. The first years of Soviet power were marked by a relatively liberal nationalities policy. The Bolsheviks needed the support of the ethnically dispersed regions and made significant concessions. The Kazakh language was given official status, schools offering instruction in the native language were opened, and national literature and art developed. However, from the mid-1920s, the policy began to tighten. Repressions against the national intelligentsia began. In 1927, the leader of the Alash Party, Akhmet Baitursinov, was arrested, and in 1930, Alikan Bukhaykhanov. Many prominent Kazakh cultural figures were accused of bourgeois nationalism and repressed. Even more tragic were the consequences of collectivization, which began in the late 1920s. The Soviet leadership planned to eliminate nomadic livestock breeding and transition the Kazakhs to a sedentary lifestyle. Private ownership of livestock was to be socialized, and collective farms were established. However, nomadic herding was the foundation of the traditional Kazakh way of life, closely linked to the people's culture and mentality. Forced collectivization met with widespread resistance. Many Kazakhs chose to slaughter their livestock rather than hand them over to collective farms. Others attempted to emigrate to neighboring countries with their animals. The result was a terrible catastrophe. Livestock numbers were reduced several-fold, and famine set in. According to various estimates, between 1.5 and 2 million Kazakhs died between 1930 and 1933, more than a third of the republic's entire population. Hundreds of thousands fled to China, Afghanistan, and other neighboring countries. This tragedy, known as the Asharshilik, Great Famine, became one of the most difficult chapters in the history of the Kazakh people. Entire clans and tribes were lost, and many cultural traditions were disrupted. Kazakhstan only recovered from these demographic losses by the end of the 20th century. Concurrent with collectivization, the republic's intensive industrialization was also underway. Large industrial enterprises were built in Kazakhstan, metallurgical plants in Temirtau and Balkhash, and machine-building plants in Almaty and Karaganda. Extractive industries developed: coal in the Karaganda Basin and oil in the Emba district. Industrialization required a massive influx of workers. Hundreds of thousands of specialists from other Soviet republics, primarily Russians and Ukrainians, were sent to Kazakhstan. Furthermore, in the 1930s, various unreliable peoples were deported to the Republic: Koreans from the Far East, Poles, and Volga Germans. As a result of these processes, by the end of the 1930s, Kazakhs constituted less than half of the Republic's population. In the cities, they found themselves in an absolute minority. Russian effectively became the primary language of communication in industrial centers and government institutions. The Great Patriotic War brought new challenges and simultaneously facilitated the further development of Kazakhstan's economy. Dozens of industrial enterprises from the western regions of the USSR were evacuated here. The Republic became a major supplier of strategic raw materials: lead, zinc, copper, and coal. More than 500,000 Kazakhstanis fought on the war fronts. Among them were many heroes: pilots Nurkan Abdurov and Talgat Begeldinov, sniper Aliya Moldagulova, and the Panfilov Guards led by General Ivan Panfilov. Kazakhstanis participated in the defense of Moscow, Leningrad, Stalingrad, and even reached Berlin. The post-war decades were marked by further economic development in the Republic. In the 1950s, the Virgin Lands Campaign began, a massive campaign to plow the steppes for grain cultivation. Hundreds of thousands of young people from all over the Soviet Union came to Kazakhstan. The Virgin Lands era transformed northern Kazakhstan into the country's largest grain-producing region. New cities were built: Tselinograd, now Nur-Sultan, Rudny, and Arkalik. However, the environmental consequences of the Virgin Lands era were catastrophic: soil erosion, dust storms, and the disappearance of steppe vegetation. During these same years, Kazakhstan became a key center of the USSR's space program. In 1955, the Baikonur Cosmodrome was built, from which the first artificial satellite was launched, and in 1961, the spacecraft carrying Yuri Gagarin was built. Kazakhstan became a major center of the defense industry. Missiles, military aircraft, and radar stations were manufactured here. The Republic became a nuclear weapons testing ground. Since 1949, more than 400 nuclear explosions have been conducted at the Semipalatinsk test site, causing enormous damage to the environment and public health. By the 1970s, Kazakhstan had become a highly developed industrial republic. It produced approximately half of the USSR's oil, a significant portion of non-ferrous metals, coal, and grain. The Republic contributed over 4% of the Soviet Union's gross domestic product. However, economic development was not accompanied by a strengthening of Kazakh culture. On the contrary, a policy of gradual rapprochement and merging of nations was pursued. The Kazakh language was effectively excluded from official spheres, higher education, and science. Many Kazakhs, especially in cities, had a poor command of their native language. The situation began to change in the 1980s, when Mikhail Gorbachev became General Secretary of the CPSU Central Committee. The policies of perestroika and glasnost also affected Kazakhstan. Discussions began about national policy, environmental issues, and historical matters. The first serious manifestation of the national movement was the December events of 1986 in Almaty. They were sparked by the appointment of Gennady Kolbin, a Russian sent from Moscow, as first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Kazakhstan. Young people demonstrated in protest, demanding the appointment of a Kazakh. The demonstrations were brutally suppressed, but they demonstrated a growing national consciousness. In 1989, Nursultan Nazarbayev, an ethnic Kazakh who had long served in the Republic's party and government bodies, became first secretary. He began pursuing a more flexible national policy, promoting the development of Kazakh culture and language. The collapse of the Soviet Union confronted Kazakhstan with the need for self-determination. Unlike the Baltic republics or Georgia, Kazakhstan did not seek immediate independence. Nazarbayev advocated the preservation of a renewed union state. However, after the August 1991 coup and the subsequent collapse of the USSR, the republic had no choice. On December 16, 1991, Kazakhstan declared independence, the last republic to leave the crumbling Soviet Union. The first years of independence were extremely difficult. The republic's economy was closely integrated into the union system, and the breakdown of economic ties led to a sharp decline in production. Gross domestic product fell by more than half, unemployment rose, and living standards declined. The issue of ethnic relations was particularly sensitive. More than 100 nationalities lived in the republic, with Kazakhs accounting for less than half the population. Many non-native people feared discrimination and began to emigrate. Over the course of the 1990s, more than 2 million people, mostly Russians and Germans, left the republic. President Nazarbayev pursued a cautious nationalities policy, striving to maintain interethnic harmony. The concept of Kazakhstani patriotism was adopted, uniting all citizens of the country, regardless of ethnicity. Russian retained its status as the language of interethnic communication. At the same time, market reforms were implemented. A national currency, the tenge, was introduced. The privatization of state-owned enterprises began, and prices and foreign trade were liberalized. The reforms were painful, but gradually the economy adapted to the new conditions. Foreign investment in the oil and gas industry played a crucial role in stabilizing the economy. In the mid-1990s, contracts were signed to develop major fields, Tengiz, Karachaganak, and Kashagan. Kazakhstan became attractive to international oil companies. By the late 1990s, the economic situation began to improve. Rising oil and metal prices on global markets contributed to increased export revenues. Industrial production began to recover, and investment in the economy began to grow. The 2000s were a period of dynamic economic growth. Gross domestic product increased by an average of 10% per year. Revenues from oil exports allowed the accumulation of significant foreign exchange reserves and the creation of a stabilization fund. Economic success allowed for ambitious projects. In 1997, the capital was moved from Almaty to Akmola, renamed Astana, now Nur-Sultan. The new capital was intended to symbolize the country's renewal and its focus on the future. Over the course of 20 years, a modern city with futuristic architecture emerged from the steppe. Government buildings, office centers, and residential areas were constructed. Astana became a showcase of the achievements of independent Kazakhstan. The social sphere also developed. Education and healthcare indicators improved, and life expectancy increased. Kazakhstan became one of the most dynamically developing countries in the post-Soviet space. A significant achievement was the strengthening of the Kazakh language. Although Russian remained widely spoken, more and more Kazakhs were learning the state language. National literature, cinema, and music developed. Kazakhstan pursued a multi-vector foreign policy, maintaining relations with Russia, China, the United States, and the European Union. The country became a member of the UN, the OSCE, and other international organizations. In 1994, Kazakhstan voluntarily renounced its nuclear weapons, setting a model for other countries. However, economic growth was accompanied by a concentration of political power. President Nazarbayev gradually strengthened his powers, curtailing the opposition's activities. Critics accused him of authoritarianism, but the majority of the population supported a course of stability. The global financial crisis of 2008 severely impacted Kazakhstan. Oil and metal prices plummeted, leading to a decline in budget revenues. The tenge began to devalue, and inflation rose. However, thanks to accumulated reserves, the crisis was overcome relatively quickly. In 2010, Kazakhstan chaired the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, a recognition of the country's international standing. In 2017, Astana hosted the Expo International Exhibition, showcasing Kazakhstan's achievements in alternative energy. In March 2019, a change in political leadership occurred. President Nazarbayev, who had ruled the country for nearly 30 years, handed over power to Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. The new president promised to continue the course of modernizing the economy and society. However, the transition of power was accompanied by rising social tensions. In January 2022, mass protests broke out across the country, sparked by discontent over rising prices for liquefied natural gas. Unrest spread to many cities, with the situation particularly acute in Almaty. To stabilize the situation, the government was forced to seek assistance from its Collective Security Treaty Organization allies. CSTO peacekeeping forces helped restore order and were subsequently withdrawn from the country. The events of January 2022 demonstrated the need for serious reforms. President Tokayev initiated political transformations aimed at democratizing the system of governance, expanding regional rights, and combating corruption. Today, Kazakhstan stands on the threshold of new changes. The country possesses enormous natural potential, abundant reserves of oil, gas, uranium, and metals. Its advantageous geographic location makes it an important transit hub between Europe and Asia. As part of China's One Belt, One Road initiative, new trade routes are passing through Kazakhstan. Transport infrastructure is being developed, and modern logistics centers are being built. The country has the potential to become a bridge between the world's largest markets. Demographics are also working for Kazakhstan's future. The country's population is getting younger, and the birth rate is rising. The proportion of Kazakhs is increasing, strengthening the state's ethno-cultural foundation. At the same time, the multicultural nature of society is being preserved. Challenges remain: economic diversification, reducing dependence on raw materials exports, and developing high technology. Improving the education system and training personnel for an innovative economy are essential. Maintaining interethnic harmony amidst the growing national consciousness of Kazakhs is an important task. The experience of other countries shows that this process can be accompanied by conflict if not managed wisely. The history of Kazakhstan is the history of a people who have managed to preserve themselves through centuries of hardship. From the ancient Sakas and medieval Turks to the modern independent republic, a common thread of continuity runs through the generations of steppe dwellers. Great upheavals, the Mongol conquests, the Dzungar Wars, the famine of the 1930s, did not break the spirit of the Kazakh people. Each time, it was reborn, enriched by new experiences, yet true to its roots. Today, Kazakhstan has entered a new era. Opportunities lie ahead that previous generations could not have dreamed of. Technological advances offer boundless prospects for this young nation with a long history, but remembering the past is important not only for the sake of historical justice. Centuries of experience teach us wisdom, tolerance, and the ability to find a balance between tradition and innovation. It is precisely this quality that enabled the Kazakh people to overcome all trials and create a modern, prosperous state. The journey from nomadic hordes to the Baikonur Cosmodrome is the journey of an entire civilization. Kazakhstan has proven that it is possible to remain true to one's roots while simultaneously keeping up with the times. This is the main lesson of its history. What challenges do you think Kazakhstan faces in the future? Will the country be able to maintain its unique identity in a globalizing world? Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and like it so you don't miss new episodes about the fascinating history of the world's peoples.